Welcome to the Drum Shuffle, a podcast offering insights, perspectives, and conversations for drummers. I'm your host, Jamie Eads.
Hey, how's it going out there, everybody? Welcome to the Drum Shuffle. Jamie Eads joining you as always. This is episode 82. I hope everybody's having a fantastic week out there in Drumland. We certainly are over here at the Drum Shuffle World Headquarters. I have a great interview for you today. This interview was recorded on Veterans Day with a veteran of the United States Navy and the Naval Band. Which was pretty cool, but I'm going to be joined in just a moment by the great Joe McCarthy, and you are going to love this interview. It's a fantastic conversation right after this message from our sponsor, Los Cabos Drumsticks. The best kept secret for drummers is finally out. Los Cabos Drumsticks may look like the sticks you grew up with, but these are not your father's drumsticks. Los Cabos Drumsticks is Canada's #1 drumstick brand, and they are coming to a retailer near you. With operations in over 28 countries worldwide, thousands of drummers have already discovered the Los Cabos difference. Using FSC certified wood from Canada and the US, Los Cabos make the finest quality drumsticks, percussion tools, and accessories on the market. The best news, Los Cabos Drumsticks offers you a ton of choice. They have 22 individual drumstick models and 14 percussion tools, many of which are available in 3 different wood types: maple, white hickory, and red hickory. Red hickory comes from the center or heart of the hickory tree and has been independently proven to be both stronger and more elastic than white hickory without adding a lot of weight. While most drumstick manufacturers have shunned red hickory, Los Cabos Drumsticks has embraced it, becoming the only established stick brand in the world to offer a full line of red hickory drumsticks. To learn more about Los Cabos Drumsticks, visit them online at loscabosdrumsticks.com, follow them on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and don't forget to ask for Los Cabos Drumsticks at your favorite retailer. Dare to be different. Join the Red Hickory Revolution with Los Cabos Drumsticks. All right, guys and girls, as I mentioned, we're about to be joined by the great Joe McCarthy. Joe is the leader of the New York Afro Bop Alliance Big Band, and they have a brand new record that just hit the streets called Upwards. It is a fantastic listen. I encourage all of you guys to go out there and grab it. But what struck me so much about my conversation with Joe is this is a working drummer. He has played with just everybody in the jazz world, but he has so much great knowledge to share. This is the kind of person that you want to seek out. And even if it's not just take a lesson from, it's just to sit down and talk and say, tell me what to do to make my career better. Joe is just a consummate professional, a veteran, knows what's going on. So I was really pleased to get him on the Drum Shuffle. So please help me welcome to the show, Joe McCarthy. Hey, good evening, Joe. How's it going today?
It's great, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks so much for taking time to do it. I certainly do appreciate it. And being that we are recording this episode on Veterans Day, let me say thank you so much for your service in the United States Navy. We will certainly talk about your experience there in the band, but happy Veterans Day to you, Joe.
Thank you very much. It was an honor and privilege, and my thoughts go out to everyone else as well, too, who has served.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a special holiday around these parts for sure. So, Joe, what we typically do here on the Drum Shuffle is we ask our guests to kind of start at the beginning. Tell us all where you grew up and how you got into music and drumming to begin with.
Sure. I grew up in a town in Connecticut called Meriden. And I actually am one of those guys that probably falls into the category of a sort of late starter I played when I was, I think I started in middle school, but I wasn't taking lessons at that time, and I was just kind of doing what a lot of kids do. I was playing in the band, and started taking lessons, I think, maybe towards the end of middle school into high school, but it wasn't really until, I think maybe it was my sophomore year, my sophomore year in high school. I had a friend recommend a teacher to me to go see. His name is Art Peretta. He's passed now, but when I started studying with Art, that was kind of what I would consider really to be the beginning for me. And Art was very intelligent. He was an old school bebop guy, but he was classically trained. He actually also played in the Navy band too.
Oh wow!
A long time ago. Yeah.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, he was actually one of the instructors at the School of Music many, many years ago. And I started studying with him, and he actually said to me, you need to go to music school, and which I hadn't even thought of, and my parents really had thought of that. And after I studied with him, he was had a very close association with Alexander Lepak, who was my teacher at the Hart School of Music, and Mr. Lepak had a very, very, very wonderful career as a teacher, and had a very impressive list of students. And at that point, I never really thought that there was any way that I would ever be able to get into at that time it was called the Hart School of Music. Also because of the fact that I really didn't have any classical training either, and when you studied with Mr. Lepak, you studied everything.
Yeah. So
you studied classical percussion, played some drum set. You basically did whatever was on his agenda, and somehow I got in there, and I'm still not exactly sure how I did, but I got in, and when I heard all of the other guys that I would later become so close with, and still am, I was like, man, I'm in trouble. So I basically locked myself in any of the practice rooms that were available over the course of the next 4 years. And I was also, even though Mr. Lepak didn't know about it at the time, and he's passed now, so I can tell this story, and he won't give me any what about it. But I was also studying with Ed So, going and taking lessons with him while I was at Hart, but they were kind of had to kind of keep those two separate because they had very sort of different approaches to teaching and all that kind of stuff, and that was just kind of not the right thing to do at that point. But Ed was another person who was extremely influential to me, and he was living at that time. I think he was living in New Haven, and he was teaching at a drum shop in Hartford, but then he would go and play with a big band. So I could take a lesson with him, and then I could go listen to him play, which was, I had already heard him on a bunch of records and stuff, but when I started going and listening to him after I would get destroyed in my lessons, I was like, oh, okay. Now this is starting to make sense to me. And it was the same thing with Mr. Lepak. Mr. Lepak played in the Hartford Symphony for 50 years. And I started to learn that, the importance of people that were not only great players, but they were people that understood how to convey their knowledge.
Yeah.
Which is the reason that I started teaching,
Yeah.
Because, once that started happening, I was like, things were making a lot more sense to me. And I really understood, because I think all of us at some point run into people that can't really convey what needs to be conveyed. And so that was a big, both of those teachers really planted that very firmly in me, and has really been a huge part of, my whole thing now, as I try to move forward and help people that come to me.
Well, I think this is a little bit of an interesting sidebar. You said something there, and I want to explore this for just a second. There are lots of guys that are great teachers that can teach the instrument and teach you everything you need to know. But I think that sometimes there's a missing link if your teacher doesn't also gig in some way, some fashion, because I think when you go sit down and take a lesson for any instrument, but then, that weekend you can go see your teacher playing in his band or in an orchestra or something like that, there is definitely a connect the dot moment there. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I 1,000%, because if you think about it this way, it's you're studying music to learn how to play an instrument, okay? Now, you had mentioned something to me earlier before we had started about the whole YouTube thing,
Right.
And I think, and for me, and I'm kind of an old fart, and I've gotten to a point in my life where I'm not, I don't have any problem with expressing my opinions. And I think that people, the immediacy of where we live today has really been, has caused a lot of problem for those of us that teach. And I think that, if you're taking lessons with somebody and they're showing you how to play an instrument and they're not playing that instrument with other people, there's usually a reason for that. and I'm gonna leave it at that,
Sure.
And I know a lot of people and maybe they're doing it face to face, and they might even be doing it on the internet where they're teaching 5,000 students, but they might not be making music with anybody else. And it's like, why are we learning how to play this instrument? Are we learning how to play this instrument so we can be a solo drum set player? Well, if you can make a living doing that, God bless you.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of a cool thing. But when we learn how to play our instruments, one of the most important things is being able to make music with other people,
Yeah.
And that, that is absolutely imperative. It's not, oh, by the way, it's like, if you don't understand that component of why you're doing this, then there's a extreme disservice at that point,
I do know. And, I was bemoaning the fact with, another drummer buddy just not too long ago that it used to be, if you talk to anybody in the music business, the industry, as we colloquially say, record label types, or, even, when you're seeking endorsements or something like that, it used to be they wanted, a picture of you and, a CD from your band or whatever. Now it's almost always the first question that's asked is, how many Instagram followers do you have? And
God bless that comment. It's like, I have, it's so funny, the band, let's see, what is this? I think this is I should know this. This is our 7th album, I think. And I am so terrible at social media. And, it's like, I've got this band that's got a little bit of a reputation, and we've done some things. And I just hired a young guy to do some social media for me. And within 4 days, he has reached more people than I've reached in about 10 years. and you know what? It's really funny. He said something to me, and I never thought about this. It's like the whole electronic world, that's like this whole new skill set, like learning how to play an instrument. You know what I mean?
It really is.
It's like managing social media is a skill that I absolutely don't have. I don't know that I want to have it. But I think that like when you're getting hired for gigs, or for instance, if you're looking to get a gig for the band, I lived in New York for quite a while, and I've had club owners just very honestly say to me, "We don't care what the band sounds like. How many people are going to be in the club?"
Yeah,
this is New York City, and there's some pretty good bands in here.
Yeah.
And that's where we are right now. So it's a tough market, not only on the teaching front, but on the playing front,
Yeah, I do. And, as a gigging musician, it's very true. And, there's a running joke on the show. The great Rod Morgenstein was a guest at one time. and he was talking about the Dixie Dregs playing at the Exit Inn in Nashville in 1975, I think. And he said, you know, I think we were making $500. And I said, well, you know, isn't that funny? Because they still pay $500 for a show at the Exit Inn in Nashville 45 years later. You know, and the reason that's kind of a running joke is because people don't care how good you are. It's, can I sell, you know, beer or shots of whiskey, or how many people can I get in here? How many people can pay the cover charge so that I can pay the electric bill at the end of the month? So the reason why musician wages have stayed stagnant for half a century is because there's always another band that will take the gig cheaper. That's just
you are absolutely right.
You know, that's just a fact.
It is.
And, you know, I don't want to turn this into a get off my lawn, you pesky kids kind of thing. But, you know, the whole social media thing, you know, I'm a Gen Xer. And so, you know, I've seen the advent of this technology, but I've got friends that are younger than me that they spend all day promoting their band or their career through social media. I simply don't have the bandwidth to be able to do it.
Yep. And you know what I also think, you know, and I know you are right. We could talk about it forever. I really think that, you know, and for me being a little bit older, it also comes down to priorities. And my wife is quite a bit younger than I am. And she, you know, she totally gets it. But it's like, listen, am I going to go out to the garage and shed, or am I going to sit behind this computer and get, you know what? No, I'm going out to the garage.
Right.
And I'm going to play the drums because that's more important to me. And so, you know, has that hurt my career from like the sustainability of my calendar? Maybe it has. But at the end of the day, it's like, you know, what am I going to be spending my time doing? And it's not going to be a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I totally hear you. Well, so, you know, kind of back to your story, that was an interesting sidebar, and thank you for indulging me on that. But
sure.
Kind of getting back to your history, you know, I know that, you know, University of North Texas was part of, you know, your life. Obviously, it goes without saying that if you play drums and you go to the University of North Texas, you know what you're doing. How did you end up there? Was that just kind of the next logical progression?
Well, no, actually it wasn't. So basically what happened was, you know, I told you that I had been taking lessons with Ed Silk. Right. So Ed, this, I'm so old that this is when Ed first started teaching full time at North Texas. That's how old I am. And he just retired. So you could do the math from that. But, so he left town. He and his wife, moved because, you know, he got the full-time gig to be the drum set teacher down there. And of course he had already been a student there and done his whole thing there. So I finished up at Hart. And of course, I was like, you know, I'm never going to go back to school again, and now I'm going to be this amazing musician. And then I realized, you know, as I told you earlier, with my late start, is like, you know, I still have a lot of work to do. So I finished school, and I was hanging around in the Hartford area, just, you know, playing and doing whatever. And then I spoke to Ed on the phone, and, you know, he said, you know, why don't you come down here and get your master's, you know? And of course, I wanted to continue studying with him because I had learned so much from him, and he had, you know, really opened my eyes, you know. So I went to North Texas, and again, I did it in sort of a different way because when I graduated from Hart, I had a degree, but I had a degree in percussion. Okay. And when I went to North Texas, I really, really did not want to get another bachelor's degree because I didn't want to be in school for the rest of my life, you know. So I applied to North Texas. Dr. Shitroma was running the percussion program at that point, and I called him, and you know, what I really, my real intent was to get my drum set playing together. But, you know, because of my studying with Mr. Lepak, he had really instilled in all of us, which really kind of saved my rear end throughout my career, was having this, like, you know, genuine versatility to where, and I'm not saying that in an arrogant way, but I'm being able to play classical percussion and then be able to sit down and play some drums whatever it was that you needed to do, you would be able to do it. And that was the way that I was trained. So I figured, okay, I'm going to continue studying percussion, but I'm going to take lessons with Soap, and then that way I can and just make sure that both of these things are growing. And then whatever it is that I need to do when I get out of school, then everything is going to be cool, and I'll be able to play some drums, and I can still play percussion. And it was kind of an interesting thing because when I was still at Hart, one of the summers I went to I was accepted to the Aspen Music Festival, which is a classical summer thing, and it was really a cool thing because the summer that I went, there were like some very, very heavy percussionists there, all of which have major symphony gigs and have gone on to have amazing careers. But one of the teachers there, Doug Howard, was the principal percussionist in the Dallas Symphony. So I started subbing with the Dallas Symphony, which was like an amazing thing. It's like this dude is, all the guys from SMU where he taught, these guys were like hardcore classical guys. And even though I could play classical, I would much rather be, spending my time playing drum set. But, I was understanding the importance of learning how to play in a symphony orchestra and ended up being on one of the records, one of the Dallas Symphony records. And it just really broadened my perspective,
Sure.
So the North Texas thing, I think probably the best part of my education there was when I was at Hart. Hart was a very small community, even though a very talented pool, but just the numbers were lower. Then I get to North Texas, and there's over 200 drummers there. So, and the beautiful thing about when I was there was the guys that were there. I mean, my God, everybody was there when I was there. Jim White was there, Keith Carlock was there, Jim Riley was there, Jason Sutter was there, all these guys that I became quite friendly with, a lot of them. And it really kind of opened up my palette because I had a chance to, hear all of these guys play all the time, in addition to me trying to play as much as I could. And I would say that, coming from a much more condensed pond, if you will, and being in like a conservatory type environment at Hart, and then going to North Texas, which is just like this enormous factory where the level was, because I was teaching when I was there, because I was getting my master's. I was one of the teaching fellows. So I was giving lessons, and I was able to just really get very involved in sort of the academic end of it. We rewrote the curriculum when I was there, and a lot of the guys that I was teaching with, Eric Johnson, the guy who runs Innovative Percussion, he was my roommate. It's like it was an amazing time, and I learned so much stuff, and it didn't really start to distill until a few years later, because even when I was at North Texas, I still had only been playing seriously for 4 or 5 years,
Yeah.
So when I was in Dallas, after I graduated from North Texas, the most hilarious thing is I ended up getting a college teaching job. And
okay.
So there you go. And it was a recommendation from my teachers at North Texas, so all of a sudden I'm, 6 or 7 or 8 years later, now I'm teaching on the collegiate level and doing some stuff around Dallas and all that stuff. And at that point, that was when at that time, I'm remarried now, but in my first marriage, we had gone to undergrad together, and she was also from the East Coast, and we had decided that we wanted to go back to the East Coast, and one of the guys that I went to college with was in the Naval Academy Band in Naval. And he called me, and he said, we have an opening. Do you want to come and audition for the band? And it was something that I never, ever considered doing. Like a lot of times when you're in college, guys are always like, I'm going to get into one of the service bands and all that stuff. I'm like, man, I'm not doing that. I'm going to move to New York. Well, my ex-wife had no interest in going to New York. So I was like, okay, well, I got to come up with another plan. So it's like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to go and take that audition. And I did. I went to take the audition, and I got the job.
Well,
so that's when the next phase kicked in.
Right. Well, and you ended up serving 20 years in the United States Navy. So, again, thank you for your service. But, one of the things that always rings in my head whenever I think about, the military bands, okay, the one thing I always land on is Steve Gadd played in the U.S. Army band. And if it was good enough for Steve Gadd, it should surely be good enough for any other drummer, right? I mean,
man, I'm telling you, there's some people that are knowledgeable about the bands, and there's a lot of people that really don't know a lot about them. In the Naval Academy band was, in the D.C. corridor with all the other bands, and I've got to tell you, they're collectively, without a doubt, are some of the greatest musicians in the world. And the level that we were expected to play at was as high as any group anywhere. And when you're around musicians all the time that play that well, the thing that I noticed, it did one of two things. It either inspired you or it made you just check out.
Yeah,
and
right.
I really realized that, like with a lot of the older players, guys that like me that came in, just absolutely full of fire. And I was working harder. I was practicing and working harder than I ever was in my life. And it was like some of the older players just absolutely could not stand me because the only thing I was interested in was getting better.
Right.
And that was it, and that's actually where Afro started, was when I was in the Navy,
Really?
And, yes. And that band, the band that we won the Grammy with, was all military band guys except like 2 or 3 guys.
No kidding. That's awesome. Okay, cool.
Really? Yep.
Okay.
And
so I don't want to put too fine a point on this, but I do want to make sure we say this, that you guys won was it a Latin Grammy for the Latin Jazz Album of the Year? Is that right?
That's exactly. Yeah,
okay.
That is right. And then, and with that particular record, we also got nominated for the Grammys too. And so, we won the Latin Grammy, and then we went to the Grammys, and we did not win the Grammy, but we were one of the 4 final bands. And that was, it was an amazing thing. And in this year, with Dave Samuels just passing away, who is a dear friend and someone that I have an enormous amount of respect for, I look back at that time, and I can't not relate it to being in the band, because if I wasn't in the Academy band, I don't know that I would have started Afro Bop. I don't know that I would have had the chance to play with Dave, because Dave came and played with us a bunch of times in D.C., and we developed a great relationship. And that whole big band idea for that record was mine, and I was like, you know what, a lot of this Caribbean jazz music, Caribbean jazz project music, so amazing that with the colors and textures of a big band, and the colors and textures in Dave's writing and his whole harmonic conception, there was no way that wasn't going to work, in my mind.
Yeah.
And because of all the guys that I was surrounded with, all of the writers and the arrangers and the players, that's the only way that record came to fruition, the way that I heard it in my head. And, if I wasn't in the band, even though the band really had nothing to do with Afro-Bop, it's like, I don't know if it would have happened, So that all of that came together. And, of course, it was sort of a blessing and then a curse at the same time, because, so we win the Latin Grammy, and I'm still active duty in the Navy, and I'm getting calls from all over the world for the band to tour and to do all these things, and we couldn't.
Right. You had to stay close.
I had a family. I had young kids, and I wasn't, as excited as I was about that happening, I wasn't going to, abort the family mission just to, go and do that. So I think in me being brutally honest and looking in hindsight, that hurt the trajectory of the band, but I couldn't do it at that time. And it was, and obviously we made records after that. And, whether or not we win another Grammy really, to me, has nothing to do with anything. But, all of these things, if we look at everything, through the universe, all of these things happen the way they did for a reason. And, and now coming up on the new release being record number 7, now I live in, outside of New York, and the band is all New York musicians, and this record sounds completely different than every other record we did because the guys in New York play completely different. I play different than when I was younger. I have my whole mindset about the band and about life is completely different, and it's just, music is so amazing because, regardless of, like when you and I were talking earlier about the whole paradiddle thing and all that, it's like, man, when I play the drums now, it's like my reasoning and everything is completely different now. I do things I have a much different purpose, I feel, behind the drums. And I'm really going to be curious to see, if people dig this record or, I'm not like a drumnastics kind of guy. And I don't, like when people are always talking about the way drummers play technically and all that kind of stuff, I don't think about any of that stuff. I just play the drums and, hopefully it makes the band sound good and whether it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
It's just, it's just a different lens right now.
Well, and that's the cool thing about music and recordings, especially, I've said this many, many times, when you go do an album or a song or whatever set you're putting together, whatever paradigm you're using, right? It is just a snapshot in time of where that group is as players, basically.
Yep.
And it's
absolutely
conveying the emotions that are being felt at that time. Now, two things that I want to say here, okay? And I would be remiss if I didn't. Number one, as a voting member of the Recording Academy, so I get to vote on the Grammys. First of all, even being nominated for a Grammy is a huge, huge accomplishment to be recognized by your peers in the industry. That's number one. Number two in that is the new record I've listened to. You may get a nod for this one because it's a really darn good record. Let me just say that.
Thanks. I appreciate it. You know what? I really feel that I almost didn't. I was almost ready to hang the band up. I got married. I got remarried about a year ago, and the woman that I married, Angelica, this woman not only saved my soul, but I can say that she saved Afropop. Because I was about ready to throw in the towel. I was like, I'm done with this. I'm not, what we had talked about with the social media thing and all that stuff. It's like, this has been a one-man, I'm not going to say show because, I don't know that it classifies as a show, but it's like, when you do everything yourself, and it's like, it gets to the point that the last thing you have time for is to get back behind the drums. It's like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
But then I started thinking about, why I started the band in the first place. And it's like, it's also like when people are saying, why do you make big band records? That's insane. It costs a lot of money and all that stuff. And it's like, but I when I think about the band and I think about big band music, I almost think of it as, I feel like it's sort of my job, not just me personally, but it's like, I want to see big band music go in a different direction, and I want to see it. It was just like, when the earlier bands made their marks. And I really feel that this record for Afropop is like another departure because, I was involved in some of the arranging for some of these tunes, and the music is just different than a lot of the music we've done. It's not all straight up Afro-Cuban. It's like, there's some funky stuff and there's some however you want to classify it. I don't know how to classify it, but I think that's the real reason why this stuff is happening. And that was the reason I was like, you know what? I don't know if I'm going to have the gas to do another one after this one, but it was like, you know what? I've got to do this at least one more time. Recording the band in New York, which is where I had always envisioned the band being, and not only geographically, but also just sonically, because the guys in New York play different than the guys in D.C. The guys in D.C. that play in military bands, and I include myself in this pile, we are, or I should say were for me, because I don't do it anymore, but you were required to play as close to perfect as possible.
Right.
And however that needed to be taken care of was on you, you know?
Yeah.
And when you listen to a lot of the military bands, you know, a lot of people think, you know, I mean, like when we made those records, you know, that's how well those guys read, you know? Some of those guys were actually sight reading this music, you know?
Which is insane. You know, that's crazy.
Exactly. But I'm telling you, man, that the level of the reading, like, you know, when I was running the big band at the Academy, I mean, guys are playing at that level, you know? And when you get to New York, the whole, you know, just looking at it from the perspective of New York musicians, they're not playing in military bands, and they're in a different environment, whether they're playing shows or they're straight up jazz guys or straight up, you know, Afro-Cuban guys or pop guys or whatever. You know, I mean, the subgenres in New York are in the millions, you know? So it's like the lifestyle, the pace of the city, the survival, the whole thing. It's like cats are playing the horns with, you know, with different stuff on their mind, you know?
Yeah.
And you can hear it. And I don't know if this record sounds different to other people, but it sure as hell sounds different to me, you know? And I think that's a really neat thing, you know?
Yes, I do. And I'm following exactly what you're saying. And it's, you know, to harken back to something you said earlier, it's like when you were the young cat in the Naval band, right? You're pushing the envelope of the guys that have been there for 5, 6, 7, 8, 15 years, whatever the case may be. You know, cats in the big city, you know, I mean, how many horn players are there in New York City right now?
Yeah.
I mean, you
millions.
know, I mean, you could fill a football stadium with world-class horn players. So it's,
absolutely,
you know, they understand I've got to take some kind of special sauce to this gig to make sure I get paid. You know, it comes from a different place is what I'm trying to say.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's, when you live in New York, and I didn't stay in town for a long time. It's like when I first moved to New York after I had left D.C., I got to town, and as soon as I got to town, I got called to do a national touring Broadway show. And I took the show, you know, for mainly for financial reasons because, you know, my kids are still in college now. The older one's in grad school, but, you know, it was like what I really should have done was just to stay in New York and wait it out like everybody else does because that's what you need to do when you get into New York. But it was an opportunity that I couldn't turn down just because of where I was in my life. And then, of course, I ended up being out of town for almost a year, you know?
Right.
And then when you come back, it's like, you know, I come back into town and I'm not a young guy. And it's like, it was very difficult for me because, you know, when I was in D.C., there was a lot of stuff going on and I was extremely busy. And I get to New York and I'm watching the fish swim, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, oh yeah, that's right. I just showed up and I need to pay my dues just like everybody else. Nobody in New York cares what I did in D.C. or anything else. You know, it's like you gotta pay your dues just like everybody else, and that's the way that it works in that city. You know.
Yeah.
And so even as an old man coming into a very vibrant city, it's like, man, that was an absolute wake up call. You know.
Yeah. Totally. You know, I mean, I get it, and. You know, I spent some time in Nashville a couple of weeks ago and, you know, I was talking to some of my Nashville friends and they were like, you know, I thought it was hard when I moved to town 10 years ago, you know, try moving down here now and trying to get a gig. He was like, you know, there's, you know, 2,000 people a day show up with an instrument down here. You know, it's, it is hard, but, so the new record, I want to make sure we talk a little bit about the new record. It is called Upwards. And, you know, by the time this goes to air here in a week or so, you know, we're recording this on November 11th. The street date for this was last Friday, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So by the time everybody gets to hear this, the record will have been on the street for, you know, a couple of weeks. First of all, let me just say that sonically, it is just a fantastic record. It sounds amazing. And
Thank you.
I also want to say, you said I can't really classify it. Neither can I. I mean, some of it is definitely, Latin. Some of it is definitely bop. But some of it is not. So
yeah.
How did this set of songs come together? Was this, is this something that's been brewing for a year or so, or was it hey, everybody, let's show up in the studio and jam?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for asking that. For me, making my own record is about the most torturous thing that I can do.
Amen.
It really is. It is absolutely torturous for me, not only because I'm not a big fan of my own playing, but just making sure that, the way that people listen to music right now, and this is I'm not trying to slight anyone. Nobody listens to records anymore. People listen to songs, And to me, when you're making a record is like telling a story. And there's good stories and bad stories, and bad stories usually tend to make people not want to listen to them,
Yeah.
And so people tend to close the book and then go back to the computer,
Yeah.
But it was very interesting because I did the tunes that were going to be on this record changed many, many times, and what had happened was. Well, first of all, for instance, with Caravan. The thing with Caravan was, and as you know, this is a big celebratory year for Art Blakey.
Yes.
I usually, we have done it in the past, but, I'm a huge fan of presenting new music. And, if you are going to go down the path of regurgitating someone's beautiful song, hopefully it's going to be in a different light. And so with the Caravan thing, I had been listening to, Blakey's Caravan record, as everybody does. It's such a great record. I'm like, man, we need to do this different. But I had been experimenting just rhythmically with some stuff, with some 6/8 stuff that I had been messing around with. And so basically the whole kind of underlying premise that I came up with Caravan was sort of shifting. The groove is sort of now we're getting into the old drumnastic talk, but the groove is basically shifted over an eighth note. So the bass line is sort of in the spirit of the old bass line from the Blakey record, but it's displaced. And so there's like a couple of different things going on. So the melody is still playing in what we would consider to be sort of a straight up type fashion, but the groove is displaced,
Yeah.
And I think once someone can hear that sonically and really hear what's going on, and hopefully, I pray they understand it, it's really kind of a neat experience, It's just like a really neat thing to listen to because everybody who's, is a fan or has heard Art Blakey's music, or Caravan, which has been recorded, 4 billion times, you're hearing the tune on two different planes, you know?
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And so something like that tune came out of, that's where that came from. But like, for instance, the tune Upwards, Manuel Valera, who in my opinion is one of the greatest pianists in the world and is also an amazing writer, when I was putting the roster together, he had asked me, if he could contribute to the record, and for financial reasons, I did not have the dough to commission him, and I didn't have, out of respect to him, I wasn't going to ask him to, write something and not be able to pay him what I know he should be paid. So we actually went down the road of taking some of his small group music and putting it into big band, and he now has his own big band in New York, and I know that he's going to be recording at some point, and I know that he's not going to be recording any of his small group music. He's going to be writing all new big band music. But I've always been a huge fan of his music because he's a Cuban-born pianist, and his rhythmic thing is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
In addition to his melodic thing, which is also amazing. And so we started throwing around some ideas for some of the small group tunes, and Upwards and the tune Isabelita were the two tunes that we came up with that had not been recorded in a big band format. And I just absolutely love both of these tunes, and that's how they ended up on the record. And Vinny Valentino, the guitar player on the record, we've got two of his songs on here. The tune J-Ben is actually a tune that was written for the great New York bass player John Benitez, who's an amazing bass player who has had a wonderful career, But what we did with that tune was I took the melody of J-Ben, and again, we rhythmically changed the melody and put it to a different feel. So now if you're familiar with the original version of it, it's a straight eighth version. We did it in 12/8, but again, we changed the melody. So rhythmically, the melody, at least in my ear, is we just sort of like rhythmically put a little more tension in the melody, and then combined it with sections of the straight eighth original version. So it was sort of like a tension and release type thing when you listen to the melody. So then when it goes into the straight eighth thing, it's sort of a release from that 12/8 vibe, but then it goes back, and that was kind of I guess the genesis, if you will, behind that. And then we have Boris Kozlov, the bass player in the band. He's got, a really great tune called Nostalgia in Time. And that's just a tune that, like, to me, I mean, you sort of hear it in Afro-Cuban, but then just sort of hearing it straight up. And what we ended up doing in the studio, like what you said earlier, was, I don't know how it happened. We just sort of mutated into sort of like a funky thing that happened there that day. And, it just kind of got into like a rock kind of vibe, and it just sort of went where it did. And then Vinny put like that whammy guitar sound on there, and it was super cool, and I didn't expect any of that. That was something that came out of the session. So yeah, that's how those tunes came together. And then the 5 for Elvin thing.
Okay, here we go.
All right, get ready for this.
All right.
Now there's a story behind this one. So 5 for Elvin was recorded by Dave a while back with the Caribbean Jazz Project, and we recorded it on the record that we won the Latin Grammy. But the guy who did the arrangement of this song, Alex Brown, is an amazing pianist that I actually knew in D.C., and then he ended up in New York, and he plays in Paquito de Rivera's band, and he's doing all sorts of stuff in New York. And so he wrote the tune in a different clave. So the tune had been recorded in 3/2, even though the tune is in 5. But he wrote an arrangement of the tune being in 2/3, which is just, to me, was just absolutely amazing,
Yeah, that's a mind warp right there.
Yeah, man, and he had he wrote some like he had kind of a straight ahead vibe in it too, as sort of like a nod to Elvis. Of course, 5 for Elvis, right?
Right.
So, and I just really loved the arrangement. I was like, man, we got to do this, And of course, the clave is different. So, I think the clave police might have gotten a little disgruntled about that at some point. But
that's okay. They don't have arrest powers in New York. So,
yeah. Well, the thing is, like I said earlier at the beginning of our conversation, I've gotten to this old fart stage of my life where, it's like some people are going to dig things and some people aren't. And it's like, well, if you don't like it, don't listen to it,
Yeah, well, so, you can only satisfy yourself, Joe. I mean, at the end of the day, it's your name on it. So you do what you like, right?
Yeah. But I think that, in a statement like that, I think, there's a level of integrity that all of us, have that we deal with in whatever way that we deal with it. And it's like, I would never, ever put out anything in any recorded capacity that I didn't honestly know in my heart that I gave it what I needed to give it. And I know that I did that, not only with that arrangement, but with anything on that record. And, I know that some people aren't going to like it, and I'm 100% fine with that. But that record is as sincere as any recorded piece of music on this planet,
Yeah, well, you said a mouthful there, and I do want to point out, that's why I'm not really cut out for, record label, type stuff. I'm a rock guy. But when the A&R guy comes in and says, hey, can't you write something that's more like Aerosmith? Well, then that just becomes pandering, right? At that point, you're just trying to sell crap. And
exactly.
You're not expressing yourself. You're not being true to yourself as an artist. Not that I would call myself an artist, but at some point you got to put your stake in the ground and say, this is what I'm willing, this is the hill I'm willing to die on. This is what I want to put out,
Yeah. I mean, like you think about it, it's like, putting out a freaking Afro-Cuban big band record isn't the smartest thing in the world to do,
You're not really looking for sales, right?
Yeah, I mean, my God, I've lost more money with this band than probably anybody in the world. So it's like, it's like, when you're doing these kind of things, I just, you really have to have a reason for wanting to do this that is a genuine reason, based on something other than sales.
Right. Right.
And, and that's this 100%, man. This is an absolute love-hate relationship, but I can say that I regardless of how the record is received by everybody else, I mean, it's kind of weird because I don't know if I'm, playing the drums very good right now, but I feel good about the whole record, Yeah. I can sit there and pull my own shit apart and that is what it is, but at this point in my life, I mean, what good is that going to do me? It's like, getting back to the paradiddle thing. It's like, that's the way I played that day. This is the way the band sounds. And, for, like you said, for that captured moment. But I think the vibe of the record is genuine, And to me, that's the most important thing. That's it.
I mean, it's certainly authentic. I mean, I'll give you that, and so let me ask this, and I'm just curious of your opinion on it. I would much rather go in and do a record where my playing isn't, just phenomenal, but everybody else is playing really well, than to have a record where my playing was stellar and it lacks life, or everybody else kind of mailed it in, so to speak. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I am much more concerned about the sound of the band than myself.
Yeah.
100%. Now, if I'm not doing my job, now that's a whole different story.
Right.
If I don't have my shit together, and maybe there are certain things where, yes, I wish I could have played it better, but, a lot of people, they make records, and then they go and redo the whole freaking drum track because of this or that. No way. No way would I do that shit. No way. What you got, what you heard is what happened that day, for better or for worse. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
And it's like, because if that's your reason for making the record, then just make a solo drum set record.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can play along with tracks and you can do all your tricks and all that shit. And I mean, that's not a record. That's like, I always use that word drumnastics. It's like, like cats that are playing the instrument because of the physicality of it. It's like, I don't play drums for that reason. And man, I can't hang in that arena. I'm not that kind of drummer. Yeah. I'm a drummer that, I want to make music with other people. And I want, the feeling of getting to the end of the track and everything is happening with everybody else. That's far more important to me than, I played this, Hemiolo, how you doing, flip over backward thingy. I don't care about any of that. I don't, that doesn't mean anything to me. So.
Yeah, I mean, I like listening to that stuff as much as the next drummer, right? I mean,
sure, of course.
I grew up in the world of Rush and Neil and all these great drummers that can just do anything. Thomas Lang, Marco Miniman.
Oh, yes, but you know what? But those guys, their drumming is genuine and it's sincere. That is for real. It's like, when you hear those guys playing that stuff, like the first time I think I heard. And I'll be honest, I don't listen to a lot of it, but I remember the first time I heard Virgil Donati, I was like, what the F is going on right now?
Right.
I mean, is that really happening right now? Or I remember the first time I met Horacio,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I was like, I think I was questioning my existence on the planet after I heard that shit,
Yeah.
It was like, okay, I guess I've got a little bit of work to do here. But, man, it's like, when you hear the guys that you mentioned are guys that have, well, like you said, have put some stakes in the ground, and they've made some statements that have rattled some cages. You know what I mean?
I do.
But the stuff but it's sincere.
Yeah.
That's the way they play. It's not, like then you get other guys that hear that stuff, and then they're trying to go after that when they ain't ready to do that. It's like, leave it alone, man. Leave it alone, because it's been done very well, and it's like, now you take that and then you run in your direction. And it's like the same thing like when people talk about Afro-Cuban stuff with me. I'm not going to ever compare myself to Horacio or Daphnis or Ignacio or any of those cats. No way. I'm just me, trying to represent the music the best way I can from my perspective. And I am in no way trying to recreate music from a very, like if you're talking specifically about Afro-Cuban music. Afro-Bop Alliance is a jazz band. That is a jazz band that plays with and has been inspired by the music of Cuba, Africa, South America, the Caribbean, everywhere from around the world. It's not a salsa band. It's not a Cuban band. It's just my interpretation of all of the music that I love so much, which could not be classified in one genre,
Right.
And that is the reason that I started the band, because I love playing straight ahead music as much as I love Afro-Cuban, as much as I love playing a pop gig. I love all of that music equally, and I pray that people can hear that in the band,
Yes, I absolutely do. And, you brought up a really good point in there. You grew up in the jazz world. I grew up in the rock world. And I think what we're both trying to say, I've had Daphnis on the show. I've had El Negro on the show. If you went out and tried to do what they're doing, it would be inauthentic. Just like if I tried to do what Thomas Lang and Marco Miniman and Virgil Donati do, first of all, I couldn't even get close to it, but it would be obvious that I'm a fraud in trying to accomplish that stuff.
Exactly. You know what I think the best thing about when we hear these drummers, this is like another subject. It's like, if somebody hears somebody who's really cooking or doing some new shit that's amazing, like when people get mad about that stuff, or it's like, oh, I could do that stuff, or it's like, man, that's not why these people are playing this music. Not right. So you can get pissed off because you can't do it. People play music. I guess people forget the whole thing. It's like we listen to music to be inspired.
Exactly.
When I hear great musicians, I don't care if someone's playing a kazoo. If they're playing it well, I'm inspired. And if you don't get that out of music, you're in the wrong damn business. You know? And drummers, you know how drummers are. Drummers get to be so competitive, and somebody did this. Someone comes out with a great record, and then this other cat's not going to talk to him because they're mad that they made a good record. Goodness gracious, man! Don't do that. Life is too short for that.
Yeah.
It's like be inspired by what people do, and let that. Instead of trying to rip off somebody verbatim, let it grow out of your own thing. To me, that's the beautiful part of, why, when we hear just amazing musicians, it's like that's why we do this. At least that's why I think we should do this.
Absolutely.
Stuff,
Absolutely. I mean, you have to develop your own voice on the instrument. And, you know, and I know you're a guy like me. Every time I go see a band, I'm stealing something from the drummer.
Of course.
You know,
you steal as much as you can, man, but it's got to come back out of your own soul, you know?
Yeah, well, and we all have our own filter that stuff comes through, you know, and that's what's so cool about it. Joe, I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much. You know, this has been a great conversation, and we've got to do this again because I think you and I could sit and talk about this stuff for days, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having this type of forum because, you know, it's, as I've gotten older, I think, you know, when we're talking about, you know, why we play the drums, having these types of conversations, to me, I think is more important than talking about, you know, I played this double pair, how you doing on this tune. It's like, man, we need to talk about why we play the drums. And that, to me, that's what really inspired, like my conversation with you has inspired me, you know?
Oh, wow.
And that's the shit, you know?
Yeah, well, it's very kind of you to say that. And, you know, as I've said, you know, I'm coming up on 2 years of doing the drum shuffle here. And, you know, I've always just wanted it to be a conversation between two musicians, you know, and let's talk about what made you who you are, how did you get here, and why that's important. You know, again, if you want to know the fill that Joe did at 2 minutes and 13 seconds of, you know,
don't ask me.
Right. But I mean, there's YouTube for that, right? I mean, you can find all these tutorials everywhere on, you know, what Bonham played in the 37th measure of When the Levee Breaks. It's there.
Yep. You're right.
This isn't the place for it. You know, I've just always tried to be about, you know, let's talk and let's figure out what makes our guests tick. So, to that end, as is the tradition here on the Drum Shuffle, I'm going to put you on the spot here. This is where we ask you for a good piece of advice for other drummers and other musicians. In your career, what have you learned that you can share with us that we should all be using every day?
You know, and that is a great question. I think I don't, you know, I also do a lot of teaching in addition to playing, you know, and I think that I don't know if it's because of the physical nature of our instrument, or just drummers in general. I mean, I don't really know what it is, but I think that it is absolutely essential for people to really step back and really analyze why they are playing the drums. Why are you playing the drums? You know, and if it's in our arena of doing it for a living, I think the most important word to me these days is being genuine and being sincere. Mm-hmm. And when you get behind the instrument, wherever it is that you play, you know, a lot of people take gigs because they need to make money, and then they show up on the gig and they punish everybody in the band because they really don't want to be there because they want to be on another gig, right? So when you sit behind the drums, play the drums like it's one of your children, your girlfriend, your wife, your parents, you know what I mean? Make love to your drums, and don't play your drums because you're pissed off at somebody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like be sincere and play music because, you know, like if you think about it, if I were to ask you and you're asking me the question, why did you start playing the drums? What would you say? What would you say?
You know, it's all I ever thought about as a kid.
Uh-huh.
You know, it wasn't to, you know, pick up girls or, you know, to be famous or anything like that. It was just such a part of my soul, my physical being. I ate, slept, you know, walked, talked drums and nothing but from the time I was about 10 years old on. And I don't even know where that started, to be perfectly honest with you. I think it has something to do with Tommy Lee flying upside down in a music video. I was like, holy shit, I have to do that. I have to do that. You know, I mean, it just, it just looked like, I don't know, the most fun thing on earth.
There you go. You just said it right there, because you wanted to have fun.
Yeah.
And it was part of your soul. So it's like when we go through life and then we have to start playing, paying the bills to play our drums, or, whether or not that for some people, if that gets taken away because they can't pay their bills, I think we can never lose sight of why we decided we had learned it, or we had wanted to play drums to begin with.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most important thing, because I think for some of us, we lose sight, and for whatever reason it is, if it's because of a financial reason, for some people it could be a physical reason. Maybe you can't play because of, if something happened to you, or God forbid someone wasn't able to physically be able to get behind the drums and do what they do. I think we should never lose sight of why we decided to play the drums. I think that is one of the most important things, because I think, we get so sidebarred with all this other stuff, and then, that's not why we started to play drums to begin with. Be genuine, be sincere, That's I think that's the only way that you can honestly make music. And, I just think that, at this point in my life, I think that's just the most important thing. When you get behind your drums, play your drums. Play your drums.
Yeah. Man, Joe, that's great advice. You said something in there that I just want to put a little bit of a point on, drummers showing up to a gig that they don't really want. And I'm just going to remind all of our listeners here, I've taken gigs before that I didn't want to be on, but
everybody has.
Absolutely. If you're trying to make a living anyway, I've been on some horrible country gigs, where it's just like, the music just doesn't speak to me. It's not all that much fun for me, but you have to approach it as though your next opportunity may come from this. And some of those horrible country gigs that I played on, you make a connection with the bass player or the guitarist.
There you go.
And
there you go.
And it leads to a really cool rock gig 3 months from now, or whatever the case may be. So,
and you never know. You never know what's going to come out of anything, But the thing is, it's like, that's the only way that we can survive, because there's so many people that play all of the instruments that everybody, even the people in the audience, the people in the band, your family, your friends, people know if you're talking straight or if you're playing straight. Just be straight. You know what I mean?
I do.
Do your thing, man. Do your thing, whatever it is. And if it's for some reason, if it's, not as technically cool as this guy, or it's not as with this guy or this girl or whatever, who cares? Do your thing and feel good about your thing. So then it's not going to always be like, well, man, I wish I could do this like so. Man, life's too short for that shit. Just play the drums and enjoy yourself and realize that, you know what, we're all lucky to be able to do this,
Yeah, man, that's words of wisdom right there from the great Joe McCarthy, folks. Joe, one last thing before we let you go. Thank you so much for doing this. We'll do it again, but give everybody the website, the links, all that good stuff. If somebody wants to reach out and connect, tell us where we can find you.
Great. Yeah. And thank you again, man, so much. This was a great chat to me.
My pleasure.
If people want to get in touch with me, the easiest thing to do is just go to my website, and the website is also for the band too. And it's very easy. It's just joemccarthymusic.com. And you can basically find out whatever it is that you need to find there. And my email is on there as well too. And and if anybody has any anything good or bad or whatever about our conversation or about the records or anything I've done, I would love to chat with anybody. We have a wonderful community, and I'm thrilled to be here chatting with you, and I look forward to our next chat, and I hope people get a chance to check out the record, because the record as I've been shooting my big mouth off, it's very sincere.
Yes, it's a great record, and I encourage everybody to pick up a copy. Now, I'm going to say this again. I say this almost on every episode. It's available everywhere. Apple Music, Spotify. It's available at all those places, but I also noticed that you have a CD Baby link. Folks, buy this in physical form from CD Baby. That's what helps Joe pay the bills the most. If you stream it a billion times, Joe will be a hundredaire, not a millionaire, a hundredaire.
Yeah,
if you,
I'll be a negative hundredaire, which I already am. So don't make it any worse, everybody.
Exactly. If you want to make $1 million playing the drums, start with $2 million. You will be, you will end up with $1 million. I guarantee it. Joe,
you might even want to start off with like 4 million.
Yeah, that's a good point. Joe, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the Drum Shuffle. We will do this again very, very soon.
All right, man. Thank you. Take care of yourself and also everybody else. Thank you for listening, and we'll see all of you around. Thanks.
Absolutely. See you, Joe.
Okay.
All right, guys and girls, that's going to wrap up episode 82 of the Drum Shuffle. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. We simply cannot do this show without each and every one of you listening to us week in and week out. As always, I'm going to ask you to hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you use to listen into the Drum Shuffle. We're going to have plenty of great interviews coming up that you're certainly not going to want to miss. Now, with that being said, next week is Thanksgiving, so there will be no episode next week. I'm going to give everybody a break. I've got to go pick up my daughter from ballet conservatory next week, get her home for the holidays. So we'll be taking a little bit of a hiatus next week for Thanksgiving. Then we'll be back the week after that. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. As always, we do answer every single email that we receive here. The Drum Shuffle Podcast at gmail.com is where you can reach out to us. Our web address is thedrumshuffle.com, and you can always find more information about my shenanigans over at jamieeads.com. For the first time in my career, I have actually done a session of Christmas music, so that's coming up here before too long. I'm excited about that. Got all kinds of cool stuff going on. So please make sure you check out jamieeads.com. Click on those social media links. You can follow me there as well. I do try to stay a little bit more active on the social media networks of Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. So again, thank you all so much for tuning in. We certainly can't do it without you guys. So until next time, may your heads stay strong and your sticks never break. Cheers, everybody.